end Israel's existence as a Jewish state. But yeah, I thought it was cool what she said. She said something about how it's so not, it's not a Jewish value to make other people refugees.
Yeah, and you don't want people to think that's a Jewish that's the other thing is it's
Right.
like, are you really trying to suggest that these are Jewish values? Because it's like one way to make a lot of people in the world be like, "Oh, Jews are the worst," is if
Yeah, of
you're like,
course.
"Well, being a Jew means
Right.
doing
Well, I
all the
remember
things the
you.
Israeli government's doing."
Well,
Like,
you have that story that you told about like drawing. You want to tell that story about drawing a
yeah, yeah,
star?
yeah, I've told this story, I think, on your show before, but,
Yeah.
like, yeah, when I was a kid and I went to Lebanon for the first time that I can remember, I was, like, 8 years old. I was just drawing shapes with my cousin, like, and I drew a star, and the only way I knew how to draw a star was, like, 2 triangles, so it makes, like, a Star of David, basically, without me knowing I drew a Star of David. And my cousin, like, freaked out and went and got her mom, and her mom, my aunt, came and was just like, "Oh my god," and I was like, "What? What happened?" And she's like, "That's a really bad symbol, like, you can't draw that, like, that's a symbol of, like, the people who bomb us."
Yeah.
And it's just like, I mean, what more do you need, like, than a fighter jet or tanks that have, like, a Star of David or
Right.
using it as graffiti? Like, my grandmother's house was occupied by Israeli soldiers, my aunt's house, and they, like, drew a Star of David and, like, trashed the place, and that's what they leave behind, so it's like, people in the region, of course, they're gonna conflate, like, Jews with that if that's the only Jews
Yeah.
they know.
Right. And if Israel claims to be the Jewish state and to be acting on behalf of the Jews. And yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that I agree with what Lily said, who just stepped down. And I do think it's an ethical question and a moral question, but also a self-interest question. Luckily, I think it's changing more and more. People are understanding that there are Jews who really reject Zionism, or they're Jews who aren't even necessarily anti-Zionist, but are very critical of Israel. Well, tell us more about what happened to your family whose houses were occupied.
So, my family is not from South Lebanon, like, which is what actually, like, experienced the most brutal of Israel's occupation. Um, but the area my family's from, like, was probably as far it's not in the north, it's, like, in the middle of Lebanon, but it's probably, like, maybe as far north as Israel as the Israeli soldiers went. That was in 1982 when the Israelis invaded
Right.
Lebanon. They, like, really went, like, deep in. They took the capital. Like, my family lives about 45 minutes outside the capital in the suburbs of it. And in the other their village was, like, or the houses, like, in my mom and my grandmother's village were occupied by Israeli soldiers, and she went to go check on her house one day. She would always tell this story. She went to go check on the house one day in the middle of the war because, like, the Israelis, and basically, I'm from the mountains, and the Israelis had taken this point in the mountains that was quite strategic, which is where my grandmother's family is from. And so she went to go check on her house, and there was Israeli soldiers in it, and she was pissed, and she yelled at them, and she told them, "How dare you? This is so shameful." And then the interesting part too is, like, so my family is Lebanese Druze. Druze, if you don't know, is like a minority sect that basically just you'll only find them in Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. And in Palestine, a lot of them got Israeli citizenship and they serve in, like, the police forces and in the military. And they're really useful for the Israelis because they obviously speak Arabic. Um, and so one of them started speaking to her in Arabic, and he turned out to be an Israeli Druze soldier. And then she got even angrier, and
Yeah.
she was like, "You traitor!" Like,
Right.
she would always tell this story. And also, in a weird way, that kind of speaks to the way that, like, Israel's creation in the region really sectarianized, like, a lot of it. It was like the first really sectarian state implanted in the region. So yeah, I mean, that's the story that she would just always tell. And then she yelled at them, and she was like, and they took a shit. Like, I walked in the room and there's like a star. They had, like, painted stars of David. Someone had taken a shit. They love to do that in homes. I don't know why. It's like a way to just, like, spit on people, I
Right.
guess.
Most moral
And
army in the
so
world.
she and my grandmother, may she rest in peace, insisted that she yelled at them so much that she made them clean up after themselves.
Oh, wow, that's great.
And then she, like, left because what's she gonna do? They have guns.
Right.
But yeah, she would tell that story. So, like, yeah, I just, and I mean, that's not an unusual story. That's probably the nicest story you'll hear of
Right.
interactions with Israeli soldiers. It doesn't usually go that well. Um, and what they did in South Lebanon's horrible. But yeah, there's Lebanese people who have way more horrible stories of, like, all kinds of torture and, you know, deaths and all kinds of terror that was inflicted by the Israelis.